Her coffee mug slid a quarter-inch toward the signature line, and the demand letter's timestamp indicated the 48-hour deadline was rapidly expiring. I sat one table over under the awning of the sunny patio café, the afternoon heat pressing against my worsted wool collar. My own appellate brief lay perfectly aligned before me, but my focus remained locked on the woman sitting in the direct sunlight. Her dark hair was piled in a chaotic knot, her oversized sunglasses slipping down her nose as she aggressively dragged a blunt, neon-pink highlighter across a stack of legal paper. She was doing it wrong. You do not highlight an indemnification clause, you strike it out entirely. She muttered something to herself, slapping the table in frustration. The coffee sloshed over the rim, soaking into the bottom edge of page 3. I stood, abandoning my dual-screen setup, and crossed the patio. "If you sign that," I stated, keeping my voice level to cut through the street noise, "you are granting them a perpetual, irrevocable, and sub-licensable right to your moral rights, which means they can use your entire catalog for a dog food commercial, and you will not see a single dime." She jerked her head up, pushing her sunglasses onto her forehead. Her eyes were lined with the kind of deep, structural fatigue that came from fighting the same battle for years, without proper reinforcements. "Excuse me? Paragraph 4, subsection B." I pointed at the neon-pink mess bleeding through the cheap printer paper. "It is a trap. A poorly drafted one, but a trap nonetheless. Whoever your representation is, terminate their contract immediately." She blinked at me, taking in my immaculate suit, the custom sterling silver fountain pen gripped tightly in my right hand, and the absolute certainty in my posture. "I don't have representation," she said, her voice a low, raspy alto that contrasted sharply with the bright pink highlighter, which is why I'm trying to figure out how to stop Reuben from stealing 10 years of my life. I pulled my business card from my inner pocket. I slid the card over the coffee ring and tapped the timestamp again harder. "Wylder Allen," I said. "I am an intellectual property litigator. You need a favor that requires professional skill, and your clock runs out in exactly 41 hours. Bring your files to my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow." I turned and walked back to my table, packing my briefcase. I did not look back to see if she kept the card. She was exactly 4 minutes late the next morning. I stood behind my desk, checking my watch as Lyla Brown pushed through the heavy glass doors of Allen and Thompson Legal. She carried a massive, scuffed leather tote bag that looked heavy enough to cause severe lumbar strain. "Traffic on the I-95, she announced, dropping the bag onto the pristine surface of my conference table. A microscopic cloud of dust seemed to settle over my polished oak. "Leave earlier," I said, stepping forward. I did not raise my voice. I simply stated the mechanical truth of the legal system. In this room, 4 minutes is the difference between an injunction and a default judgment. She let out a sharp breath, planting her hands on her hips. "Look, Wylder, can I call you Wylder? I am exhausted. I have been producing tracks for Astrid Lewis until 3 a.m. for the last month. I don't need a lecture on time management. I need to know if you can actually stop Reuben Sanchez." My internal filing system snapped into focus at the name. Reuben Sanchez, head of Apex Records, known for predatory 360 deals, burying young artists in administrative debt, and leveraging technicalities. "Empty the bag," I instructed. Lyla started pulling out folders. It was a disaster. Manila envelopes stuffed with loose pages, sticky notes clinging to the edges, napkins with lyrics scribbled on them mixed in with quarterly royalty statements. "Stop," I ordered, stepping up beside her. "Do not touch another file. You are destroying the chain of custody." She stepped back, holding her hands up. "Be my guest, counselor." I took over. I built 3 stacks, signed, threats, proof, then circled one date in red on my legal pad, 48 hours. The only sound in the room was the crisp snap of paper. "Explain the leverage," I said, opening the top folder of the threat stack. "I signed a co-publishing deal with Reuben when I was 24, Lyla said, her defensive edge dropping as she watched me work. "I wrote and produced all the tracks. 5 years ago, we severed the contract. I kept the master rights to my back catalog. But now, Astrid, a kid I mentor, is about to drop her debut album. Reuben sent a notice claiming that because I used his studio equipment for 3 hours to mix Astrid's vocals, a secret secondary clause in my old contract was triggered. He is claiming joint ownership of the new album, and a reversion of my old catalog as collateral. I found the clause she was pointing to. My eyes scanned the dense legalese, analyzing the structure, the commas, the conditional phrases. It is a cross-collateralization snare, I said, picking up a black pen. He hid an equipment use trigger inside the standard non-compete addendum. Can he do that? She asked, stepping closer. A faint scent of vanilla and old paper cut through the sterile, filtered air of my office. No, I said. I drew a hard, sharp line through the paragraph, crossing it out with absolute finality. The clause is excessively broad and violates public policy regarding restraint of trade in this state. He doesn't want the rights. He wants to force you to settle so he gets a cut of Astrid's profits. Lyla exhaled a ragged breath. So, what do? We don't negotiate, I said, looking her directly in the eyes. We terminate. By day 4, the friction between my methods and her habits reached a critical threshold. We were in the firm's small conference room. My law partner, Julius Thompson, had poked his head in twice, noted the mountain of discovery documents, and wisely retreated to his own office. Lyla paced the length of the room, her phone pressed to her ear. I know he called you, sweetie, Lyla was saying, her tone shifting to a gentle, maternal cadence. She hung up, tossing her phone onto the table. It landed squarely on top of my color-coded timeline. I picked the phone up by the edges and moved it exactly 2 inches to the right, placing it on a blank legal pad. Lyla noticed. Does everything have to be a grid with you? Yes, I replied flatly. Grids win arbitrations. Chaos loses them. Reuben just threatened to leak Astrid's unfinished demos to the press, she said, rubbing her temples. Maybe we should just offer him a 10% mechanical royalty. It is not fair, but it gets him to back off. It protects her. My mechanical keyboard clattered to a halt. I turned my chair to face her, the wheels gliding silently on the hardwood. Absolutely not. Wylder, she is 21. She is terrified. I can't let him ruin her launch just because I have a point to prove. It is not about proving a point, I stated, standing up to cross the room. I stopped 3 feet from her. If you offer him 10%, you validate the premise of the snare. You establish a precedent that his fraudulent clause has legal weight. He will take 10 now and sue for 50 later. I am trying to protect my artist, she snapped, stepping into my space. And I am trying to protect you, I countered, keeping my voice deliberately quiet. He uses paperwork as a weapon. The only way to break that tactic is to present a harder wall. I am that wall. Let me do my job. She glared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I adjusted my tie, forcing my posture to remain open but unyielding. Apologizing meant yielding the strategic high ground, and I could not do that if I intended to win her case. Lyla let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping. Fine, she whispered. But if this backfires, it is my life on the line, not yours. She walked back to her chair and sat down. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the weight of the trust she had just reluctantly handed over. I turned back to my monitors and immediately verified the deadline for the injunction response. A strange, tense domesticity built within the 4 walls of the conference room over the next week. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. The city outside was a grid of amber streetlights, but inside, the fluorescent bulbs hummed with sterile energy. Lyla sat on the leather sofa, reviewing track lists, her feet tucked under her. Earlier that afternoon, I had noticed she kept rubbing her left shoulder whenever she reviewed a thick file. I did not ask her about it. Instead, when I ordered dinner, I silently added a heated neck wrap to the firm's corporate supply delivery. When it arrived, I microwaved it for exactly 90 seconds, walked over, and placed it on the back of the sofa behind her neck. The ambient temperature in here is uncalibrated, I had stated, staring at a spreadsheet on my tablet. It was affecting your posture. Now, she was wearing the wrap, her head tilted back. She unspooled herself from the sofa and walked over to my desk, carrying her empty tea mug. She set it down on the specific cork coaster I kept precisely 3 inches from the edge of my monitor stand. It was the only place I allowed liquids. She put the mug on my coaster again, this time smiling like she'd just won a motion without filing a single page. "You are very bad at pretending you don't care, Wylder," she said softly. My fingers twitched toward the edge of my desk, then stopped. I pressed my thumbnail into the mouse and forced the cursor back to the indemnification clause on my screen. I care about the integrity of the case. Fatigue leads to missed details. Right. Details. She leaned against the edge of my desk. "Do you ever stop?" "Stop what?" "Controlling the environment," she observed. "Every pen is aligned. Every clause is perfect. You don't leave room for any mistakes." "Mistakes cost leverage," I said. I looked up at her. The lighting caught the golden undertones in her eyes. I gripped the mouse tighter. "Some of the best songs I ever wrote started as mistakes," Lyla said gently. "A wrong chord, a missed beat. If you control everything, you squeeze the life out of it. I am an attorney, Lyla, not a musician. If I hit a wrong chord, my client loses their livelihood." I pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from my drawer. I flipped it open to a page where I had meticulously logged every upcoming date for her album launch. The injunction hearing is set for the 14th. Astrid's single drops on the 16th. We have a 2-day window. She looked at the notebook, registering her own schedule written in my precise, block lettering. "You memorized Astrid's promotional tour dates?" she asked, her voice dropping a fraction. "I track all relevant variables," I said, closing the book sharply. She didn't push it, but the smile remained as she walked back to the sofa. The midpoint twist hit us on Thursday morning, 48 hours before the hearing. I was drafting the final motion to dismiss when Julius knocked on my open door. "Wylder, check the entertainment blogs. Now." I opened a new tab. The headline stared back at me in bold, undeniable text. "Astral Sounds. Is Astrid Lewis's debut album owned by Apex Records?" Reuben had bypassed the legal channels entirely. He had leaked the existence of the dispute to a major music blog, effectively putting a cloud on the title of the entire album in the court of public opinion. Lyla burst into my office a minute later. She was pale, her hands visibly shaking as she gripped her phone. "Spotify just pulled Astrid's teaser track," she said, her voice hollow. "The distributors got spooked by the legal threat. They won't release the album until the ownership is resolved. A hidden clause in the distributor agreement. If there was pending public litigation over rights, the platform could freeze the asset to avoid liability. Reuben knew we would beat him in arbitration, so he triggered a public panic to freeze her income stream today. "I will file an emergency cease and desist," I said, my fingers flying over the keyboard. I hated variables I couldn't control. "I will draft a statement for the press clarifying the fraudulent nature of his claim." "Wylder, stop," Lyla said. I kept typing. "If we hit him with tortious interference, we can force the platform to restore the track by tomorrow." "Wylder, please, stop," she shouted, her voice breaking. I froze. I looked up from the monitors. Lyla stood in the center of the room. Her heavy tote bag dropped on the floor. The fierce, fighting energy she had carried all week was extinguished. She looked incredibly tired. "He won," she whispered. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Even if we win in court next month, the album launch is dead. Astrid's momentum is gone." She pressed her hands over her face, her shoulders shaking. My instinct was to fix the legal mechanism immediately. I opened my mouth to explain the timeline of a preliminary injunction, but I looked at her shaking shoulders, and I forced my brain to shut down the lecture. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked around the desk. I stopped 2 feet away from her. I did not touch her. I stood as a solid, immovable object in her chaotic world. "Sit," I instructed, pointing to the leather chair opposite my desk. "Drink the water. Then open your laptop, we're finding the waiver tonight." She lowered her hands, blinking at me through red eyes. "What waiver?" "He did not win," I said, holding her gaze steadily. "He made a desperate move because the legal trap failed. This is a panic response. He is creating smoke because the fire is out. But the track is frozen," she said, her voice trembling. "We will unfreeze it. Sit down." She stared at me, searching my face for a crack in my confidence. Finding none, she moved to the chair, picked up the glass of water I had poured 30 minutes prior, and took a breath. The true test of my restraint arrived the next morning. Reuben's attorney sent over a formal settlement offer. Julius brought it to my desk. "They want the master rights to her biggest hit from 2018, Julius said, leaning against the doorframe. In exchange, they drop the claim on Astrid's album and send a clearance letter to the distributor immediately." Clean break. I read the document. My jaw locked. "It is extortion." "It is a business decision," Julius corrected gently. "Wylder, you need to present this to her, and you need to let her decide. You cannot lawyer her into a corner." When Lyla arrived an hour later, I placed the document on the table. I kept my posture neutral, though every muscle in my back was rigid. "This is the settlement," I stated, keeping my voice clipped. "He wants the 2018 master. If you sign, Astrid's album goes live tonight." Lyla picked up the paper. She read the terms. I watched the resignation wash over her features. She reached into her bag and pulled out a pen. My heart hammered against my ribs. Tell her no. Tell her it's a mistake. The micromanager in me was screaming to snatch the paper away. I gripped the edge of the conference table until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to remain silent. If I took her agency now, I was no better than Reuben. She held the pen over the signature line. She looked at the paper, then looked up at me. She studied my face, searching for my directive. "What do you think, Wylder?" she asked quietly. I took a slow breath. "I think you are a brilliant artist who has been conditioned to pay a toll to cross bridges you built yourself. I think giving him that master validates his theft, but it is your catalog. I will execute whichever choice you make to the absolute best of my ability." She stared at me. The silence stretched. She looked down at the pen in her hand. "If we fight, how do we get the distributor to release the hold today?" she asked. "We prove that Reuben waived his matching rights to the studio equipment use," I said immediately. The strategy already cued in my mind. If he waived it, the clause never triggered. The cloud on the title vanishes. How do we prove he waived it? We need written correspondence from him or his legal team, confirming the equipment use was unencumbered. Lyla frowned, her eyes darting as she searched her memory. 3 years ago, when we severed the main contract, there was a property inventory list. We emailed back and forth about studio time. "Do you have the emails?" I asked. She dropped the pen. She grabbed her laptop, flipping it open. My old server. I exported the PST files before I left the label. For the next 2 hours, we dug. I did not take the keyboard from her. I sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, watching her navigate the chaotic, nested folders of her digital archives. Finally, at 11:42 a.m., she hit a subfolder labeled R, Sanchez, Exit, MISC. "There," she said, pointing at the screen. It was an email from Reuben's chief counsel, dated 3 years prior. Reuben confirms that any incidental use of Apex Studio hardware by Lyla Brown post-severance shall not constitute a triggering event under Section 4B of the addendum. It was a total, explicit waiver. I stared at the screen, a profound sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. I looked at Lyla. "You found it," I said, my voice thick with respect. "You documented it." "No," she said. "I saved the mess. You are the one who told me what to look for." I printed the email. I walked over to the table, picked up the settlement offer, ripped it perfectly in half, and dropped it into the recycling bin. "Get your bag," I said, grabbing my briefcase. "We have a meeting." Reuben Sanchez relied on intimidation through environment. His boardroom at Apex Records was entirely glass and chrome, designed to make the occupant feel exposed. Reuben sat at the head of the long table, flanked by 2 junior attorneys. He wore a casual cashmere sweater, projecting an air of unbothered superiority. When Lyla and I walked in, he smiled. It was a cold, empty expression. "Lyla," Reuben said smoothly, "glad you saw reason. Astrid is a good kid. It would be a shame to stall her career over a misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding, Reuben," Lyla said. She stood beside me, her posture straight. She didn't look at his lawyers. She looked dead at him. It is extortion. Reuben sighed, looking at me. Counselor, did you explain the realities of distributor holds to your client? I placed my leather portfolio on the glass table. I opened it with deliberate slowness. I did not sit down. I explained the realities of fraud to my client, I said, my voice carrying the exact measured cadence I used in federal court. Mr. Sanchez, you triggered a distributor hold based on a claim of rights under Section 4B of the severed addendum. Yes, one of his lawyers chimed in. The equipment use clause. I slid a single sheet of paper across the long table. It stopped precisely in front of Reuben. This is an email from your chief counsel, dated 3 years ago, explicitly waiving any rights triggered by incidental equipment use. I stated, the facts falling like heavy stones in the quiet room. You knowingly asserted a false claim of ownership to a third-party distributor. In this state, that is actionable tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. Reuben looked at the paper. His casual smile vanished. He shot a glaring look at his junior attorney. I have already forwarded this waiver to the distributor's legal department, I continued, pressing the advantage. Once their counsel logs it into the queue, the hold lifts same day if we're lucky, next business day if not. If you attempt to contact the distributor again, or if you ever invoke this severed contract against Miss Brown again, I will file a civil suit for punitive damages, and I will subpoena every communication your office has made regarding artist coercion in the last 5 years. The room went dead silent. The hum of the expensive HVAC system was the only sound. You have no leverage here, I said, stripping away his bluff. You have no rights to the catalog. Do you understand? Reuben looked from me to Lyla. He realized the structural integrity of his trap had collapsed. He tossed the paper back onto the table. Fine. It is not worth the legal fees. You can have the kids' album. I know I can, Lyla said, her voice ringing clear and strong. Because you never owned it. She turned and walked out of the glass room. I closed my portfolio, snapped the clasp shut, and followed her out. The adrenaline crash hit when we returned to my office late that afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across my desk. I sat at my computer, processing the final documents. At exactly 4 p.m., an email arrived from Julius. He had CC'd me on the final, zero-balance invoice sent to Lyla's production company. The matter was officially closed. The attorney-client contract was fulfilled. She had no legal obligation to be in this room anymore. Lyla stood near the window, looking out at the city. The tension that had carried her for a week was completely gone. She looked lighter. I sealed the physical file folder, set it in the outbox, and felt the chair's leather go cold under my palms. My utility in her life was over. The void I kept carefully managed behind 70-hour work weeks waited for me in the quiet of the office. Lyla turned away from the window. She walked over to my desk, but she didn't stop on the client side. She walked around it, stepping into the space behind my desk, my designated sanctuary. I stiffened, my hands resting flat on the desk pad. She picked up my custom fountain pen, the tool I never let anyone touch. She held it gently, turning it over in her hands. I didn't correct her. I didn't ask her to put it down. I watched her, acutely aware of the vanilla scent cutting through the room's sterile air. You are very quiet, she noted, setting the pen back down exactly where she found it. The objective is complete, I said, my voice slightly hoarse. Julius sent the final invoice. You have full ownership of your catalog. Your artist is protected. We won, she corrected softly. She leaned back against the edge of my desk, right beside my chair. So, what happens now, Wylder? Do I just pay the invoice and go back to producing? I looked up at her. Yes, the case is closed. She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. She reached into her massive tote bag and pulled out her ceramic tea mug. She set it down on my desk. Her mug landed on my cork coaster again, this time without spilling a single drop. That's when I knew the chaos had learned my rules, and my rules had made room for the chaos. Astrid asked me today what it was like working with you, Lyla said, her voice quiet. She asked if we had a song together yet. You know, like a theme song. My throat felt incredibly dry. I don't listen to music while I draft contracts. I know, Lyla said. She reached out and placed her hand over mine, right there on the desk pad. Her skin was warm. But I have decided I need a permanent general counsel for my production company. Someone to handle the paperwork so I can just breathe. Someone who remembers my tour dates. She paused, her eyes steady. Someone I can trust. She was making a choice. She wasn't asking for a savior. She was offering a partnership. A practical, real-world upgrade. Completely separate from the crisis we had just resolved. I looked at our hands. I turned my hand over to interlock my fingers with hers. The contact was grounding. A sudden, solid anchor. Lyla, I said, dropping the professional armor. I will manage every contract. I will redline every trap. But I cannot promise I will not correct your grammar. She laughed, the sound bright and clear in the quiet room. I will risk it. Julius walked in a moment later, holding a stack of mail. Am I interrupting? Julius asked, his tone entirely too amused. No, I said, looking at my partner. My voice firm. Draft a new representation agreement for Miss Brown's production company. General counsel status. Perpetual term. Lyla squeezed my hand. And I will be signing it in pen, she added, looking at me. Not a neon pink highlighter? Preferably, I agreed. I had spent my life believing I needed to control every variable to remain safe. But looking at her, I realized that true order wasn't about building walls to keep the world out. It was about finding the one person worth letting inside. She asked what our song was. I didn't need one. Every single song she ever wrote would just remind me of her. Always. I learned I can be precise without being alone. The green flag wasn't the win, it was her choice after the invoice hit 0. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.